Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Jen.
And you're listening to Just This, a podcast that explores everything around being and becoming a mother or parent.
We're excited to have you join us as we dive into the practical details as well as the unseen energetics on topics that span from preconception to years after birth.
I had this hit of inspiration for a topic that is intuition versus data, or what would we call it? Evidence versus intuition.
Ooh,
Intuition.
that's a good one. I love it. Right up my alley. Glad you surprised me with this topic.
Because there was a couple of conversations I was having. One was with a couple of doulas, and one was with a prospective parent that I was be working with. And yeah, both of them came into this question of like, what are the resources that you would suggest for us, or what's your model? And then someone in the doula group that I was speaking with was asking, and do you ever reference people to evidence-based birth references? Because my whole model and what I like to really start with people, I'll just start there and then you can tune in, is having people really tap into their own intuition and what feels right for them. And it's interesting because I think there is space for both evidence and intuition. However, I feel we live in a world where there is too much emphasis put on evidence and not enough on intuitive knowing. And so I really guide people back to that and tune them into that aspect of parenting, of birthing, whatever it is that's coming up for them. And it's just interesting sometimes to see the strong pull back toward evidence, and not to say evidence is not valid, but I can expand on some thoughts around that. I don't know, after you tune in to what you think about this topic and what your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind as you're talking is maybe not what people think of as intuitive, but breastfeeding. And I say this because I think as a new parent, new mom, you get a ton of information from everybody, and all of it is evidence-based that they're giving you, right? Like, this is the way to do it. This is how often you should feed baby, blah, blah, blah. And also what I tell them is listen to everything, take what sticks, and then throw out the rest. And I think that that's like part of that intuitive process and that actual personal evidence-based versus like a scientific evidence-based as we know it in the community. And yeah, I think being in medicine, you just come across miracles all the time, so to speak. Miracles meaning that it doesn't follow evidence-based science. And there's something to be said about intuition that just always comes back for me, that I even tell parents, if you're not happy with what the doctors are saying, then just go get another opinion. You know your body, right? You know that baby, like you've been carrying that baby. That doctor has not been carrying that baby for 8 or 9 months or been feeding it or anything.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to applaud of the evidence piece is that you can really find evidence for anything if you want to.
Yes.
And that kind of leads into the things that we have a lot of research and evidence around. And there's a whole lot of data and history around why there might be more evidence for certain things versus non-evidence for other things. But I think that's important when we're looking at evidence-based research, of just remembering generally, and this has been brought up pretty frequently, but generally things that people are going to spend money to run studies on or really like gather the evidence around are when they have a motive. There isn't really a lot of stuff that's done without some kind of motive or financial benefit as far as the evidence things that are out there. And like you said, there can be evidence for anything. So there really could be somebody who could find some evidence, I feel like, to prove any point. And
I think a great example is we both done EC with our kid. We both coach it and guide people. And I think that's such a big one. Is this one article came out, he was like a urologist, a doctor like for babies. Have you heard of this one? And so he was saying EC is awful because it causes bladder problems and it teaches the baby to hold their urine, which causes urinary tract infections in the future, and then like down the line, all these things. And when you go and look at his background, like this is his background, right? He's in medicine for the bladder and specifically probably particular issues around this, right? So his view of what he's actually seeing is very limited. And then he claims that it's from EC, which there's been a ton of kids out there that have obviously been EC that have none of those issues. I think that's a really good, quick example that I'll have to find the article and we'll post it.
And I think, again, this taps into, it's really hard because there's cultures around the world that are doing this, and it wasn't called EC, it's just what they did. And that's evidence. That's evidence that it's fine and that it works for them, at least. So, yeah. The other thing I wanted to parse out with the evidence piece is that there's a lot of things in science that we don't have evidence for that 10 years later, all of a sudden, we do have evidence for. And again, easy, simple one that I think everyone could relate to is meditation. There was no evidence about meditation yet. Again, cultures know this. They practice it. Their evidence didn't need to be the scientific research. So there was evidence for that, but people would say, no, there's no proven science. And yet when they finally decided it was important enough, or whoever had the money, but I think there's a lot of things out there that we, in my opinion, we lean too much into the data sometimes around birth and especially postpartum. And there's so much we still don't know. And there's so much data that's so varied. And that's, again, why, yes, we can provide, this is what I've seen, this is what certain people have experienced, but ultimately your situation and your knowing is going to be the best barometer of what's going to work for you, your family, and your baby. And being able to give people permission to trust that is, in my opinion, far more valuable than giving them another set of data out there that can just be thrown into the mixing pot of all the data. And I feel like, honestly, it leads to anxiety. It doesn't help with postpartum mood disorders, and it can lead to overwhelm as well.
Yeah.
It's like moderation. It's like anything, but when we lean too much into the data, it can further disconnect us from our intuition, which creates more issues in the long run, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I was apprenticing to be a midwife, I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting was learning to try to present information non-biasedly. And I think two big ones that really stand out at the moment is circumcision, if you're going to have a boy, whether or not to circumcise or not. And you could probably ask a lot of people, and there's going to be a lot of controversy at that. But there's really evidence, on both sides of whether or not it's beneficial or healthy or not for the child. And then the other one is whether or not to give antibiotics if you're positive for GBS. And with that one, there's evidence outside of the country that shows it's totally fine. There's evidence here that shows you need to have antibiotics. And so again, it just proves to your point that there is two sides to evidence-based. And I think I heard it once and it was going to be worded way better than I'm wording it here, but they said the best way to make decisions is take the information and your intuition and really try to combine them and then make a decision from that point. Because like you mentioned, leaning just fully into the evidence, if your gut's telling you no, it's just not going to be ideal. And so really taking the information and your intuition as your guide is, they said, a really beautiful way to make choices.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, though, because I really do feel that sometimes we live in a world where the data is more directive and therefore, again, really isn't supportive. And we also live in a world that people aren't flexing their intuitive muscles all the time. So it's really easy to freak out because you don't know, right? You're not in tune with what do I feel or how do I get in tune with that part of myself. We've talked about this many times, especially the birthing person, the mother, after giving birth. Your intuition is so on point and you're so more in your intuitive state than probably most of the rest of our lives for us living in the modern world, that it can be actually, if people aren't used to that, like that can be scary for them.
Mhm.
And that's almost, that can add to that anxiety and other things, because it's like, hey, you can just trust yourself.
Right.
And that's scary for people who aren't used to just trusting themselves and really feeling into that.
Right.
Especially if what they're feeling maybe goes against a lot of the evidence they're being served
Mhm.
from the different people around them.
Mhm.
The birth is a really great example of how that disconnect has in the past happened. And instead of trusting the birthing person, it was really taken away from them. And like we were taught not to trust the birthing person not to trust themselves, then to be given the evidence of this is what we're doing, this is why, and this is what you should do, and this is why. And I think we're finally coming back and trying to bridge that again, of giving that birthing person the floor and honoring them as an intelligent being. And they're the ones going through the process of trusting and knowing like they have a lot of wisdom to put into how this unfolds right now too. So,
Right. Right.
and I think Britt brought this up, and I really liked
Mhm.
this. When we make choices out of love versus out of fear, when
Mhm.
like we make a choice that we're confident with because we want to make that choice versus making a choice because you're scared of another outcome, or you're scared what will happen if you don't make that choice, or you're scared what others around you will think.
Mhm.
That's what leads to regret. And I think that's also what leads to more of, I don't know, the word I'm trying to look for is maybe not resonance, but dissonance. I don't, is dissonance a word?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like unease in the body or unease in your
Mhm.
system.
Right.
And yeah, so I think that's a good barometer is, why am I making this choice? Am I making it because it feels good to me? Am I making it because this is a choice out of love for myself and my baby? Or am I making this out of fear?
Right.
So
Right. I love that. Yeah, I think that's really important to do, especially as a parent. There's just so much going on that you have to make choices on, and sometimes quick choices. And yeah, having that ability to lean in and trust your body, I think is extremely important. And like you said, challenging because we're just not used to it. And I agree. I think there is a aspect that's just a little sad that we've learned we can't trust our own bodies.
I think of things like placenta.
That's
Actually looking this up recently. There's a website, if we'll put in the show notes if you aren't aware of it, evidence-based birth.
Yep.
And it's pretty good of really dishing out what is the evidence around certain things. What's the research, what's been said. And there's not too much out there on placenta, right? And it's interesting the evidence that's out there on placenta. And yet I feel like there's a lot of people who have this knowing or experiential evidence of having potentially not had placenta during their postpartum, and then having another child and having placenta during their postpartum. And that's a valid piece of evidence right there.
Right.
And our placenta episode, which we'll link to, you go into, there's a lot we don't even know about the placenta in general.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. And then I think about the evidence around sleeping, the evidence around breastfeeding and formula, and how we were raised, which we've talked about in many other episodes, versus what's being said today. And I often joke with parents because when I was growing up, it was place your baby on her tummy.
Yeah.
That was how it was done. Now it's back is best, right? You always lay them on their back to avoid SIDS. And I joke with parents sometimes, I say, I wonder what is going to be the thing in 10 years or 15 years that we're going to like look back on and be like, I can't believe we did that with our kids.
Right.
This is just interesting how evidence evolves. And yeah,
It's interesting too, because like with the placenta, studying Chinese medicine and the Materia Medica, placenta is an herb in the Materia Medica. And I know they didn't have science to prove that it did these things. And yet they have a whole page or two in the Materia Medica about the benefits of placenta. And so cross-culturally, how there's evidence there and has been there, but then on this other more modern side, they're like, no, not true. And
and how are you going to know what's right? And I do think there is, and this is where there's so many nuances with evidence of, okay, we're saying this is a diverse study, but who was included, how many females and how many males, depending on like what the study is, obviously around birth, probably more females, but what is their demographic backgrounds and social economic backgrounds. There's so many like nuances that can be placed into things. That's why, in my opinion, what's more important is we can easily provide people the resources, but I think that's what's given to people more often than not. And what's not given to them is the encouragement and space to take a minute, take a breath, tune into what matters for you, or find a reliable person to talk out what the situation you're in or what you're pondering about or what you're going through. And before we turn to evidence, just thinking, okay, before we even look at that, what are you feeling right now?
Right.
So we can have that as like a baseline, and then we can look at evidence and see if that changes what you're feeling, and then look at maybe why and then go from there.
Yeah. And I think really looking at any evidence that you read as a midwife trying to present unbiased information, it's extremely hard. You read articles, it's not like the articles are unbiased. There's always a bias in evidence-based articles. Yeah. So I think even in the evidence that you are reading, to really look at it and say, what is this trying to tell me to do this? Or is it trying to tell me to do that? Or is it doing the best it can possible to present neutral information so that I can decide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that.
There was one more piece I wanted to bring in, which maybe this should be a whole nother episode. I read this article recently that resurfaced again in the doula community, and it's an interesting article, which I'll link to, about sleep training. They mention in there the evidence around sleep training is that if you do it this way, it works, right? It works. Like evidentially it works. However, it works because of psychological trade-off for the child. Like there is, like that is why it works. That's an interesting thing, is if we were to just look at the isolated evidence, yes, evidence shows that sleep training in this way after this amount of time will 85% of the time work. And we're isolating this, and we're not looking at all the other psychological aspects of a child. I mean, we all end up getting a little bit psychologically fucked in some way, shape, or form as children.
Yes,
so
I agree.
Not to say that doesn't happen. And I'm not knocking sleep training, what works for you. Like every family is in a different place, in a different situation. But there is that trade-off of, yes, this is the evidence, it works. And this article kind of goes into it. And when you pull back, like it works because of X, Y, and Z. And maybe they're not saying that in the evidence that's provided. And so what you need to know is, are you okay with X, Y, and Z as a parent? And that often these are the factors that are why it's so hard for parents, because we intuitively know that this isn't probably biologically how things should unfold for a child.
Right.
Now, is it what we need to do for our current situation in the modern world? Like maybe it is for you. And that's, again, no judgment, but any parents do. We're not here to judge it. It's just a matter of you tuning into what's going to work for you and what are your feelings about that. Because to not even explore what you're feeling about something and you choosing it over evidence stuff, I think is just really discounting a large portion of your parenting journey, and it's going to make things a lot harder.
I love that you bring up the sleeping training, because I think it takes a certain individual to do the sleep training. And I think that there's some individuals, not that every individual can't do it, but just that it's harder for some. Like I know for me,
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I don't know if I could let my
I didn't do
cry. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
I don't know if I could do that. So obviously I didn't. I think the other one that kind of comes to mind too is co-sleeping, right? Like there's a ton of evidence out there that's really against co-sleeping. But at the same time, for me, I thought it was great. I got more sleep. I was happier. Yeah. I did it safely in the ways that, again, researching it, right? So yeah.
This is also interesting. We live in a society where we lean heavily on evidence, and therefore then it dictates how society really operates for the majority of us. And I do think if the story we had in our society around co-sleeping was different, I think people's stories around being able to co-sleep with their children would be different. I do think there is a very large correlation of, oh, I just can't co-sleep. It doesn't work for me. I think that correlation is strongly influenced by the fact that we are told it's just not okay, or you get better rest without your child, or whatever it is.
And that might be the case, but I think,
Not to say that that doesn't exist out there. I just think it is subconsciously we pick up on these things, and then that becomes our story. That is just how the world operates. We're all guilty of it. We live in societies and cultures where we're subliminally fed things all the time. And then we're like, why did Instagram show me an ad for something I haven't even talked about? I just thought it.
Right? I think it's good too. I think something that came up that you touched upon is this idea that everyone's going to have their opinions about whatever you do, whether the evidence supports it or not. And so that's why it is really important to really lean into that intuition and check in first. So that way, when, you know, the Karens of the world, because they're going to come out, whether they're your friends or your family members, they're going to have their opinions. And if you're unsure and you're doing things because the evidence says so versus what your gut's telling you, it's just it could just derail you.
This is important too. You're in such a vulnerable space when you are postpartum in your birth too. And that is why people hire doulas for birth, is because you're in a vulnerable space, and that doula is there to protect your intuition and your guidance, right? Hopefully that's what a good doula does. Obviously they're going to help you through the experience, but they're there to basically remind you that you are the one that is birthing, and you are the one that is experiencing things, and you have a say, and your thoughts and experience matters, right? And I think a good postpartum doula personally will do the same. You are, again, in a very vulnerable space. So reminding you that you can be confident in trusting your intuition. And this is why in the first 40 days, they say to really protect yourself as part of it. Looking at data is great, but then it becomes so overwhelming. And especially if we're really spreading ourselves thin and asking people their experiences, or what's the evidence here, or what's the evidence there. It's good to get some of that, and it's easy to open ourselves up a little bit too much to the spaces where it's easy to then get feedback on your choices, your intuitive choices, that maybe isn't supportive. Trust your intuition, do the things to pad it, have those people that will help navigate and support that intuitive process, and that will also support whatever comes out of your intuitive choices. When we're getting in these online spaces and we're asking and we're sharing what we're doing, it can really open up a can of worms and just open up spaces for people to get in to our psyche a little bit more than maybe needed during those times.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, just to add for everyone else out there, ultimately what I try to keep in mind working with families, and I'm sure you did too, is that everyone's just making decisions based on love for themselves or their family. And so whatever that decision is, I'm sure they didn't make it lightly. So even if you don't agree with it, or there's evidence proving otherwise, it probably comes from a good place. Remembering that coming into those spaces is really important too. And also apologize if your name's Karen, by the way.
Yeah. I think that's everything. I mean, I just wanted to touch on it because it came up and I thought it was interesting. And I also feel just so rooted in my belief that this is a really important and powerful thing to remind people about and guide them through. And there's just so much in our world around the evidence piece. And I always want to say, but what about your intuition? Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
And I also just really feel strongly that there's a lot in this space that's unfolding and is yet to be understood. And I think we will get there. Who knows how long it'll take us.
Yeah, and I'll have to look because I remember reading somewhere that they actually judged how accurate intuition is. And it's, if I remember correctly, at least 85%. I'll have to try to find that article just to prove to you guys with some evidence.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's actually pretty accurate.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any studies out there about specifically women in the first 6 months post-birth or something, or even first 3 months, just the amount of access you have to that space. You are more in that world than our world of material data, science. I will see mothers months later, even just 4 or 5 months later after working with them the first month or two, and they'll be like, I feel like I'm a whole different person. Like, it's weird to see you again. for them, their experience was they were half here and half not here. you know?
Right. 100%.
And that's a very true statement. And it's really hard to explain to anyone who hasn't been there.
Right.
There's a lot of truth in that. So trust in it.
I love that.
I have to say, don't ask ChatGPT. I'm just going to
Yeah.
say that right now.
They-
Perplexity is good because it actually has references. So if you are going to be asking any AI things, I recommend that one.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, I've caught ChatGPT in not accurate things.
Don't ask
so.
ChatGPT.
yeah.
Ask Perplexity if we're going to go that AI route. And it is, I actually do think Perplexity is easier than a Google search. We'll link that, but also evidence-based birth is another great.
Yes. And ask your body too. It knows.
Ask
It's
your body.
amazing.
And it's okay if you don't
Wisdom.
have the answer right away.
Mhm.
Ask your body and you can sit with it. Just say, please give me
Drop
this
an
answer."
inquiry.
Mhm.
And
then
it
go to
does. It
sleep.
comes up. And then go to what?
And then go to sleep, because if you ask
Yes.
yourself and you go to sleep, I swear, and the next day you'll get your answer.
I totally agree with that. Yep.
Well, if you have any feedback or thoughts or evidence you want to throw our way, or examples of your intuition leading the way, please do reach out. We have a voicemail line, and always like to join our email list. We don't plug it enough. We have an email list. Go to justthis.site, jump on our email list so you can get some fun updates. And if you have any other thoughts for topics you want, we always love to hear what you're thinking about and what you'd love us to rant on for a little bit.
Hey there, amazing listeners. We just want to say a huge thank you for tuning into our convo on the Just This podcast today. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and your continued support means the world to us.
If you enjoyed this episode and found value in it, we would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it too. Your reviews and shares not only motivate us, but they also help others discover our show.
We're also all about keeping the conversation going and hanging out with our incredible community. Head over to justthis.site, that's justhis.site, where you'll find additional resources, ways to connect with us, and join the conversation, plus some more goodies.
Thank you again for being a part of the Just This community. We'll be back soon. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself and embrace the wonder as you navigate this extraordinary adventure.